Chapter 6. Spectral Literature on the Continent. On the continent, literary horror fared well. The celebrated short tales and novels of Ernst Theodor Wilhelm Hoffmann, 1776 to 1822, are a byword for mellowness of background and maturity of form, though they incline to levity and extravagance, and lack the exalted moments of stark, breathless terror which a less sophisticated writer might have achieved. Generally, they convey the grotesque rather than the terrible. Most artistic of all the continental weird tales is the German classic Undine, 1811, by Friedrich Heinrich Karl, Baron de la Motte Fouquet. In this story of a water spirit who married a mortal and gained a human soul, there is a delicate finesse of craftsmanship which makes it notable in any department of literature, and an easy naturalness which places it close to the genuine folk myth. It is, in fact, derived from a tale told by the Renaissance physician and alchemist Paracelsus in his Treatise of Elemental Sprites. Undine, daughter of a powerful water prince, was exchanged by her father as a small child for a fisherman's daughter, in order that she might acquire a soul by wedding a human being. Meeting a noble youth, Huldbrand, at the cottage of her foster father by the sea at the edge of a haunted wood, she soon marries him, and accompanies him to his ancestral castle of Ringstetten. Huldbrand, however, eventually wearies of his wife's supernatural affiliations, and especially the appearances of her uncle, the malicious woodland waterfall spirit Kuleborn, a wariness increased by his growing affection for Bertalda, who turns out to be the fisherman's child for whom Undine was exchanged. At length, on a voyage down the Danube, he is provoked by some innocent act of his devoted wife to utter the angry words which consign her back to her supernatural element, from which she can, by the laws of her species, return only once, to kill him, whether she will or no, if ever he prove unfaithful to her memory. Later, when Huldbrand is about to be married to Bertalda, Undine returns for her sad duty and bears his life away in tears. When he is buried among his fathers in the village churchyard, a veiled, snow-white female figure appears among the mourners, but after the prayer is seen no more. In her place is seen a little silver spring, which murmurs its way almost completely around the new grave and empties into a neighboring lake. The villagers show it to this day and say that Undine and her Huldbrand are thus united in death. Many passages and atmospheric touches in this tale reveal Fouquet as an accomplished artist in the field of the macabre, especially the descriptions of the haunted wood with its gigantic snow-white man and various unnamed terrors, which occur early in the narrative. Not so well known as Undine, but remarkable for its convincing realism and freedom from Gothic stock devices, is The Amber Witch of Wilhelm Meinhold, another product of the German fantastic genius of the earlier 19th century. This tale, which is laid in the time of the 30 Years' War, purports to be a clergyman's manuscript found in an old churchyard at Kozerov, and centers round the writer's daughter, Maria Schweidler, who is wrongly accused of witchcraft. She has found a deposit of amber, which she keeps secret for various reasons, and the unexplained wealth obtained from this lends color to the accusation, an accusation instigated by the malice of the wolf-hunting nobleman Wittich Appelmann, who has vainly pursued her with ignoble designs. The deeds of a real witch, who afterward comes to a horrible supernatural end in prison, are glibly imputed to the hapless Maria, and after a typical witchcraft trial with forced confessions under torture, she is about to be burned at the stake, when saved just in time by her lover, a noble youth from a neighboring district. Meinhold's great strength is in his air of casual and realistic verisimilitude, which intensifies our suspense and sense of the unseen, by half persuading us that the menacing events must somehow be either the truth or very close to the truth. Indeed, so thorough in this realism that a popular magazine once published the main points of The Amber Witch as an actual occurrence of the 17th century. In the present generation, German horror fiction is most notably represented by Hans Heinz Urs, who brings to bear on his dark conceptions an effective knowledge of modern psychology. Novels like The Sorcerer's Apprentice and Alraune, and short stories like The Spider, contain distinctive qualities which raise them to a classic level. But France, as well as Germany, has been active in the realm of weirdness. Victor Hugo, in such tales as Hans of Iceland, and Balzac in The Wild Ass's Skin, Seraphita, and Louis Lambert, both employ supernaturalism to a greater or less extent, though generally only as a means to some more human end, and without the sincere and demonic intensity which characterizes the born artist in shadows. It is in Théophile Gautier that we first seem to find an authentic French sense of the unreal world, and here there appears a spectral mastery which, though not continuously used, is recognizable at once as something alike genuine and profound. Short tales like Avatar, The Foot of the Mummy, and Clermont display glimpses of forbidden visits that allure, tantalize, and sometimes horrify, whilst the Egyptian visions evoked in One of Cleopatra's Nights are of the keenest and most expressive potency. Gautier captured the inmost soul of aeon-weighted Egypt with its cryptic life and cyclopean architecture, and uttered once and for all the eternal horror of its netherworld of catacombs, where to the end of time millions of stiff, spiced corpses will stare up in the blackness with glassy eyes, awaiting some awesome and unrelatable summons. Gustave Flaubert ably continued the tradition of Gautier in orgies of poetic fantasy, like The Temptation of St. Anthony, and but for a strong realistic bias, might have been an arch-weaver of tapestried terrors. Later on, we see the stream divide, producing strange poets and fantasies of the symbolist and decadent schools, whose dark interests really center more in abnormalities of human thought and instinct than in the actual supernatural, and subtle storytellers whose thrills are quite directly derived from the night-black wells of cosmic unreality. Of the former class of artists in sin, the illustrious poet Baudelaire, influenced vastly by Poe, is the supreme type, whilst the psychological novelist Joris Karl Huysmans, a true child of the 1890s, is at once the summation and finale. The latter and purely narrative class is continued by Prosper Mérimée, whose Venus of Ill presents in terse and convincing prose the same ancient statue bride theme which Thomas More cast in ballad form in The Ring. The horror tales of the powerful and cynical Guy de Maupassant, written as his final madness gradually overtook him, present individualities of their own, being rather the morbid outpourings of a realistic mind in a pathological state than the healthy imaginative products of a vision naturally disposed toward fantasy and sensitive to the normal illusions of the unseen. Nevertheless, they are of the keenest interest and poignancy, suggesting with marvelous force the imminence of nameless terrors, and the relentless dogging of an ill-starred individual by hideous and menacing representatives of the outer blackness. Of these stories, the Horla is generally regarded as a masterpiece, relating the advent to France of an invisible being who lives on water and milk, sways the minds of others, and seems to be the vanguard of a horde of extraterrestrial organisms arrived on Earth to subjugate and overwhelm mankind. This tense narrative is perhaps without a peer in its particular department, notwithstanding its indebtedness to a tale by the American Fitz-James O'Brien for details in describing the actual presence of the unseen monster. Other potently dark creations of de Maupassant are Who Knows?, The Spectre, He, The Diary of a Madman, The White Wolf, On the River, and the grisly verses entitled Horror. The collaborators Erckmann-Chatrian enriched French literature with many spectral fancies like the man-wolf, in which a transmitted curse works toward its end in a traditional Gothic castle setting. Their power of creating a shuddering midnight atmosphere was tremendous, despite a tendency toward natural explanations and scientific wonders. And few short tales contain greater horror than The Invisible Eye, where a malignant old hag weaves nocturnal hypnotic spells which induce the successive occupants of a certain inn-chamber to hang themselves on a crossbeam. The Owl's Ear and The Waters of Death are full of engulfing darkness and mystery, the latter embodying the familiar overgrown spider theme so frequently employed by weird fictionists. Villiers de l'Isle Adam likewise followed the macabre school. His Torture by Hope, the tale of a stake-condemned prisoner permitted to escape in order to feel the pangs of recapture, being held by some to constitute the most harrowing short story in literature. This type, however, is less a part of the weird tradition than a class peculiar to itself, the so-called conte cruel, in which the wrenching of the emotions is accomplished through dramatic tantalizations, frustrations, and gruesome physical horrors. Almost wholly devoted to this form is the living writer Maurice Lavelle, whose very brief episodes have lent themselves so readily to theatrical adaptation in the thrillers of the Grand Guignol. As a matter of fact, the French genius is more naturally suited to this dark realism than to the suggestion of the unseen, since the latter process requires, for its best and most sympathetic development on a large scale, the inherent mysticism of the northern mind. A very flourishing, though till recently quite hidden, branch of weird literature is that of the Jews, kept alive and nourished in obscurity by the somber heritage of early Eastern magic, apocalyptic literature, and Cabalism. The Semitic mind, like the Celtic and Teutonic, seems to possess marked mystical inclinations, and the wealth of underground horror lore surviving in ghettos and synagogues must be much more considerable than is generally imagined. Cabalism itself, so prominent during the Middle Ages, is a system of philosophy explaining the universe as emanations of the deity, and involving the existence of strange spiritual realms and beings apart from the visible world, of which dark glimpses may be obtained through certain secret incantations. Its ritual is bound up with mystical interpretations of the Old Testament, and attributes an esoteric significance to each letter of the Hebrew alphabet, a circumstance which has imparted to Hebrew letters a sort of spectral glamour and potency in the popular literature of magic. Jewish folklore has preserved much of the terror and mystery of the past, and when more thoroughly studied, is likely to exert considerable influence on weird fiction. The best examples of its literary use so far are the German novel The Golem by Gustav Meyrink and the drama The Dybbuk by the Jewish writer using the pseudonym Ansky. The former, with its haunting shadowy suggestions of marvels and horrors just beyond the reach, is laid in Prague and describes with singular mastery that city's ancient ghetto with its spectral peaked gables. The name is derived from a fabulous artificial giant supposed to be made and animated by medieval rabbis according to a certain cryptic formula. The Dybbuk, translated and produced in America in 1925, and more recently produced as an opera, describes with singular power the possession of a living body by the evil soul of a dead man. Both golems and dybbuks are fixed types, and serve as frequent ingredients of later Jewish tradition.